Oh, we're live.
For thousands of years, Judaism has been defined by men. Uh, our history, our practice, everything about Judaism has been controlled and uh, led by men. But there have been women throughout our history, and particularly in modern society, who have changed Judaism. Today on Face to Face, Rabbi David and I are going to introduce you to 6 of those women.
Yeah, baby. Huh. Come on. Hey, Rabbi.
Hey, Rabbi
I
David.
feel like I just saw you
Yes, we did just come out
because
of a
we're
movie.
about 500 yards from each other.
I am really excited about today.
I am
Uh,
too. It's International Women's Month.
it is International Women's Month, and 2 weeks ago on Shabbat, I told the story during International Women's Day. The story of Rabbi Regina Jonas, the first, not that's not her, that's not her either.
Sorry, I'm getting there.
There we go. Rabbi Regina Jonas, all right, or depending on how you pronounce it, Rabbi Regina Jonas, who was actually the first woman rabbi in the 1930s, who died in the Holocaust after an entirely too short of a career. But we owe a lot to her. And just imagine what it would have been for Jewish women if we had started having women rabbis in the 1930s and not what we think was the first woman rabbi, Rabbi Sally Priesand in
Yeah,
1972.
so that I wanted to ask you about that. So why do we not know about Rabbi Regina Jonas? Is there
Because none of the men who were surrounding her acknowledged that she
Oh,
was an important piece. And we're
interesting.
talking about people like Viktor Frankl, who in the Theresienstadt um, uh, was her coworker. People like Leo Beck didn't acknowledge people who had lived, who survived the Holocaust, but wouldn't even. It was she was wiped out of history until somebody found her papers,
Was that what
and
do you think that was active? That is to say, do you think it was intentional or just a sign of the times?
I think there was probably a little bit of intentional, and some of it was
Huh.
just unintentional. Maybe it was the sign of times.
Wow,
But I'm
interesting.
glad. I'm really and Rabbi Sally Priesand, who at the time that she was ordained didn't know who this woman was. Nobody
Right,
knew who this woman
right.
was. Has now made it a point to constantly be sharing her. And there's a wonderful video of all of the first women in rabbinic life, from all of the movements going to back to Germany to hear about her life and to
Wow.
set up a plaque in her memory.
Oh,
So
that's
they really,
amazing. I didn't
yeah,
know
there's
that.
just I forget what the name of the film is. It was co-sponsored by the American Jewish Archives, and just a little video, maybe 12 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm excited about this because you and I talked about this, and we talked
Yeah.
about the fact, all
How
right, that
ironic.
what's ironic.
Well, that we're two men.
There is, yes, there is an irony to that. We will acknowledge that. But I'm also acknowledging that we can name many, many influential Jewish women. Okay? But as I thought about it, there's a difference between being an influential Jewish woman, okay, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Barbara Streisand. Pick 100, pick 1,000 Jewish women who have been influential in the world. But there's a subset that is significantly smaller, and that is women who were influential to Judaism. Right? Now, that is changing with every hour and every day.
Hey,
But
by the way, sorry to interrupt. Did you see that this morning at Women of the Wall, they said for the first time they were actually able to read a Sefer Torah, a Torah scroll at the wall. There's an amazing picture of a woman holding up this little tiny Torah scroll at the Kotel. Yeah,
wow, I've got chills in my
yeah,
arm that we're doing this podcast, which we've been thinking about for 2 weeks, and that happened.
yeah. I'll see if I
Extraordinary.
can find the link to it. Yeah, just amazing.
So our task was that each of us was going to choose 3 women who helped change Jewish life. And I don't want to say I struggled, but I struggled a little bit because the list is not as large as we would like it to be. Right?
So let me just, while you're talking, let me make an amendment to what I said. And I apologize for that. It's not the first time; it's the first time in months. I'm sorry about that. But this was posted by Women of the Wall here. Today at our Rosh Chodesh Nisan service, for the first time in months, we successfully smuggled in our Torah scroll to the women's section. We rejoiced at what is unfortunately a rare occurrence for us in the midst of the celebration. We also had to remember that it is because we are not free as women that our fight must continue, only because of our determination in the struggle today were we able to hold our service just as the men do. And it just dawned on me, Rabbi, that I don't think either of us included any of the founders of Women of the Wall.
Yeah, not
Women of the
Hoffman,
Wall.
or for that matter, any of the other ones.
Yeah.
True. There's no question, but I think that we will find that there are. I mean, certainly the third of my
Yeah.
women are is somebody who changes Jewish thought when it
Yep.
comes to how we perceive and how we include women.
Should we
All
jump
right,
in?
I forget. Am I going for? I'm going first.
You're
I'm on. All right. I want you to introduce, or I want to introduce Donna Gracia Mendes Nasi. That's quite a mouthful. This is a woman from the 16th century. She was born in 1510 and was one of the most formidable figures in the Sephardi Jewish world in the 16th century. She was born with the name of Beatrice in Portugal, I said in 1510, to a family whose members had been just maybe 10, 15 years before, been forcibly baptized. And yet they held on to their Judaism. Her life ended in Constantinople, what's now Istanbul, after a career of being a shrewd businesswoman, a leader of the Sephardi diaspora, and a very generous benefactor when it comes to Jewish enterprises. So, as a young woman, at I think the ripe old age of 17 or 18, Donna Gracia Nasi married Mr. Mendes. He was a very wealthy individual, and he died very young, leaving Donna Gracia with a young child, Anna, but he thankfully left her his fortune. And it is interesting that her husband divided the responsibility for that very, very vast fortune between Donna Gracia, his wife, and his brother, that he thought so highly of his wife that she took partial responsibility. And that's going to play a very significant part in her life story, which we're not going to get to do a whole lot of. But what we should know is that when the Portuguese Inquisition began in 1536, she and her daughter Anna and her sister fled to Lisbon, then to Antwerp, and then eventually to Venice. And they continued to practice crypto-Judaism, Judaism in secret, while maintaining a Catholic facade. The sister, Donna Gracia's sister, married Donna Gracia's deceased husband's brother. So essentially, the sister married the brother-in-law, who then remember, he had half of the responsibility, half of the responsibility. He ended up giving that half of the responsibility over to Donna Gracia. So she controlled the entire fortune. And that caused a rift between Donna Gracia and her sister. And when a Venetian court got involved in that inheritance dispute, Donna Gracia, Nasi, moved her family and property to Ferrara, Italy, and where finally, right, she was able to live openly as a Jew for the first time. Okay? And while in Ferrara, Italy, she became extremely active in the community, and particularly active in the literary activities of the Ferraran Jews, including a Bible, which was produced in 1553. There were two versions of the Bible, one of which was the one used for, that was meant for Jews, was dedicated literally to her as the benefactor, where she becomes so valuable to Judaism, and where I would say why I chose her, because of her influencing of Jewish society and the fate of Jews, was that as a businesswoman, she began to use her network of agents around Portugal and Europe to gather information, to transmit funds, to develop an escape network, and organize transportation to save conversos, Jews who had converted to Christianity, but were quietly still seeing themselves as Jews. In 1552, she moves to Constantinople, Istanbul, and she becomes a leader of the Sephardi Jewish community. She funded schools, synagogues, hospitals. She provided relief for Jews who were in need. She supported rabbis. She established synagogues. And she was an amazing individual for 16th century to have so much power. And I will just say, there was a book that was written that she sponsored, and in the book, she was described as, and I'm going to read it to you because it's so beautiful. She was described as the intrinsic piety of Miriam, offering her life to save her brethren, the great prudence of Deborah in governing her people, the infinite virtue and great sanctity of Esther in helping those who were persecuted, and the much praised strength of the most chaste and magnanimous Judith. I mean,
Wow.
like, boy, usually you get compared to one, she
That's
gets
good
compared
yichus.
to four.
Yeah.
That is great yichus. So Donna
Wow.
Gracia Mendes, Nasi, one of the wealthiest Jewish women in Renaissance Europe. And eventually she became known literally as La Signora, the lady.
Wow. Oh
So
my
there's she is.
goodness.
There's my first.
That's fantastic.
All right. Who have you got
Love
on
it.
your list?
I have a woman by the name of Sarah Scheinerer. So Sarah lived from around 1883, I think it was, to 1935, and she was a pioneer of Jewish education, but really for Orthodox young girls. That was her focus. She really changed the way that women were perceived in Orthodox Judaism. Scheinerer founded a school that I think many people may have heard of called Beis Yaakov in Poland. And at that time, especially in Orthodox Judaism, formal education for women or for girls was seen as unnecessary, sometimes even against Jewish law. But not only was Scheinerer an educator, she was a spiritual role model for many Jewish women because she lived her values in this with the same strength, with the same energy that she held her radical beliefs at that time, radical beliefs that women should be able to learn. She is quoted as having said, "My dear girls, you are going out into the great world. In a sense, the destiny of Israel of old is in your hands." And when we think of today about the shifting of leadership in synagogues, even how I remember when I was growing up, in the 70s and 80s, it was all men on the board. The women maybe did the kiddush and on Shabbat, but when we think about how lay leadership in synagogues and professional leadership in synagogues has shifted over the years, I think back to Sarah Scheinerer and how we all, Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, Orthodox, we can all be inspired by her message that young girls deserve to learn and even more importantly, perhaps, have what to offer to the Jewish community, and in fact, that the destiny of the Jewish people really are in their hands. So Sarah Scheinerer, who passed away in 1935, the founder of Beis Yaakov.
I have to admit, I did not know her, and interesting that she was your first person because she will. I'll say maybe she in some way kind of led up to my number two person, Nechama Leibowitz. Nechama Leibowitz, 1905 to 1997. And she was like Sarah. She was a passionate educator, and she immigrated to Israel in 1930, and she spent her life teaching, both inside and outside of the classroom. And the story is that for years she would teach and she would create these dafs, these pages, which brought in classical sources, and then would ask questions about them. And in 1942, some of her students wanted to continue studying her material after the school year. And so, acceding to their request, Leibowitz started to mail out her worksheets and her questions. And then they would respond. They would return the sheets or return their answers. And Nechama Leibowitz would personally check over each of them. Eventually, there were thousands of correspondents who would get her text sheets. She literally functioned as a one-woman open university, and she did it for 30 plus years without any pay. Okay? And what was so amazing. She eventually got a professorship at Tel Aviv University, but she traveled around the country in buses and taxis, on airplanes, teaching Bible and commentaries to everybody, to teachers, to new immigrants, to soldiers, to kibbutzniks, to thousands of ordinary Israeli citizens. So influential was Nechama Leibowitz that she received the Israel Prize in Education in 1956. She introduced a level of pluralism into the study of Torah. And hey there. And that she herself was a traditional woman, meaning I'll say Orthodox, and yet she allowed for anybody who was going to have something to say about the text to be included in that text's interpretation. So non-Orthodox scholars and others. I want to say something personal because
That's what I was thinking too.
yeah, sure. Because in 1990, it was either 1991 or 1992, probably early part of 1992. My first year of rabbinical school, when I was living in Jerusalem, one of her students, who was my teacher, and he arranged for a group of us to go and be in her presence and to study with her. And she, you have to understand, her humility was literally legendary. She insisted on everyone calling her Nechama. Okay, it didn't matter who you were. Everybody called her Nechama. And if you went to her apartment, which was right behind the central bus station in Jerusalem, okay, and you go up to the apartment building, and there are all of the different mailboxes right outside. Okay, each one of them, was like this big, and then there is a separate box that's like, I can't get my arms. It's like this humongous mailbox with Nechama on it because people would write to her. She refused newspaper interviews because she just didn't feel that she didn't want to be considered a museum. She didn't want people to come and just meet with her. If you were going to come and you were going to study, that's fine. Okay. But I'm not a museum, and so I'm not being interviewed. She was a passionate Zionist. She refused to leave Israel, even though she was offered large sums of money to go and teach. She was, as I said, a deeply religious person. Interesting, she opposed the ideas of feminism and the feminist movement. While she believed in equal pay and equal rights for women, she didn't want to consciously change the balance of traditional Jewish gender roles. She refused to acknowledge that she was revolutionary in any way, but ultimately she changed orthodoxies and the world's perception of women's capabilities to be scholars. And I hold up just one volume. This is her. These are the collection of her sheets, her daf that she would create. And if you go into her apartment, okay, she has along one wall of her living room, literally just a massive wall of hanging folders of all of her dafs. it was an extraordinary moment to be with her, to learn with her. And if I was only allowed one box of books to carry on to some island, these would be included in them.
I'm so
I,
jealous. I, of
yeah,
course, had to study her work. Not have to.
right.
I got to study her work in rabbinic. And when you've got Rashi and Rambam, and then Nechama open on the table, it's amazing.
Right. I'm going to say one last thing, and that was she died. She died childless, and she confided that um, she would have given up everything to have children, and that when she died, her nephew, who spoke at the funeral, said, because nobody was there to say Kaddish for her. If you are like me, if you feel like I do as a son of Nechama, then I hope you'll rise and say Kaddish. And thousands did. So
Oh my goodness, that's
extraordinary.
amazing.
Yeah.
Just
On her
amazing.
gravesite, it literally says Nechama Leibowitz, teacher. That's it. So beautiful, beautiful woman.
Unbelievable. So this next one, for some reason, Rabbi Litwak's going to challenge me on it, but I don't know why yet. He told me ahead of time he's going to challenge me. So my next is Chana Senesh. Chana Senesh lived from 1921 to 1944. She died very young, and she was a poet. And she's best known for a poem that she wrote, but she tried to evacuate Jews from Hungary during the Holocaust. She volunteered
Wait, can't hear you.
I knew that. Sorry about that. She volunteered among other young Jews in Palestine to parachute into Hungary. And she was arrested at the Hungarian border, captured by the Nazis, and she was executed by firing squad. The lore is that she never gave in to the Nazis' torture. She refused the blindfold during her execution and stared her murderers right in the eyes. There are a number of teachings and songs and quotes of hers that have become almost staples in Jewish liturgy. But this is one that I'm pretty sure Rabbi Litwak shares during Yizkor, I think, on Yom Kippur. There are stars whose radiance is visible on earth, though they have long been extinct. There are people whose brilliance continues to light the world, even though they are no longer among the living. These lights are particularly bright when the night is dark. They light the way for humankind. So, Rabbi, what would you say is your challenge?
My challenge, first of all, I have a deep and abiding love for Hana Senesh from my childhood, when the BBG chapter that was connected with my AZA chapter was called Hana Senesh BBG. So I knew of her from literally my childhood. Here's the only thing that I'm challenging, right? And I'm hesitant, right? What did she do to change Judaism?
Right.
Because that was the assignment. All right. I don't argue that she was an important person in Jewish history, and maybe her attempts to save Judaism, to save Jewish life,
Jews. Yeah.
I would go with that. I pushed to see if I could figure out if there were women who changed Judaism, and look,
Right. So I'll respond. So the reason I chose,
right, I think had an influence on Judaism because of her support, and not just of her caring for conversos and making sure they remained alive.
Right.
So that's my only challenge, even as I love Hana Senesh deeply.
Yes. So the reason that I chose her specifically is not because she tried to save Jews. but instead it's because of the way she impacted Jewish liturgy. And I'm just looking, the so much of her poetry, in my experience, is used in Jewish liturgy, and you can't go to Israel and go to the gravesite of Hannah Senesh without singing Eli, Eli.
Agreed.
That her poetry is so iconic, and it's become so vital, I think, for especially during times of Yizkor, that to me that she really had a deep influence on how we face struggle, how we face challenge, and her words, I think, bring comfort to many Jews until this day. That's my take.
All good with me. Definitely not throwing her out of the cannon. So okay, my last one, Judith Plaskow, and if I think about Donna Gracia Mendes as a woman who changed Jewish society and the fate of Jews and Judaism, and Nechama Leibowitz as somebody who changed Jewish scholarship. I look at Judith Plaskow and I say she changed Jewish thought. She really represents many women who have worked to reframe Judaism from a feminist perspective. Individuals, I will add to Rabbi David's Hannah Senesh, the writer Ruth Bryn, who transformed prayer with her writing and her translation and her poetry. She wrote a lot of liturgical poetry using vivid imagery and reworking the imagery of God, which we're going to talk about when it comes to Judith Plaskow. And that images of God as a father or as a king were problematic, and so she reworked them. I think about my teacher Rachel Adler, who first gained fame in the 1970s as an Orthodox woman who left that world, became a fierce critic of Jewish religious patriarchy. She ended up earning a doctorate in religion. She was ordained a Reform rabbi, went on to be a professor at HUC, my alma mater, after I was long after I was gone, and her writing has been influential. But really, it's Judith Plaskow. Judith Plaskow got a doctorate in Protestant theology from Yale because there was no place for her to study Jewish theology in the late 1960s, and she wanted to be a theologian. She spent most of her academic teaching career at Manhattan College in New York. And she is really the first Jewish feminist theologian to identify herself as a theologian. She was deeply learned in classical and modern Christian theology, but she was also committed to her own Judaism, and she created a distinctly Jewish theology that was in dialogue with Jewish feminist theologies, or even feminist theologies of other religions. And she has been she's had a profound effect on Jewish women's theological conversations since the 1970s. And I hold up her book, Standing at Sinai.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah,
I
for
have
sure.
so many stickies in that book.
Yeah,
Marking different. I was actually looking for mine while you were talking. It's back here. It is so overrun with notes and stickies and.
Yeah, for sure. And she, in standing again at Sinai, she really tried to break the patriarchal hegemony over Jewish history, over sacred text, the monopolies that tried to justify an exclusive masculine God language or patriarchal understandings of body or sexuality. And just the chapter on God in her book really forces us to think about the masculine metaphors that we use for God. That if God is portrayed as a father, as then human fathers will be portrayed godlike,
Yeah.
and that has implications for society, right? And I look to her when I get bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah kids who write about God and He, and I always have a wonderful discussion about, well, how do you know? How do you know it's a He?
Right.
And they've never, and it's not. I don't know either, but it they've never thought that it's possible of something else, and so that exploration that Plaskow did in God language is so valuable and so tied to justice and authority when it comes to us as human beings. And so I give her credit for creating a pluralistic, egalitarian image of God and of Jewish life.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness, she's amazing. Yep.
Yeah. All
Last
right.
one for you.
Last one. All
Debbie
right.
Friedman.
Good choice. Good
Debbie
choice.
Friedman. So Debbie lived from 1951 to 2011. And her music transformed prayers for Jews across the movements. When she was growing up, she felt really disconnected from synagogue prayers. And so she started using her gifts as a singer-songwriter to blend traditional prayers with biblical passages, along with English translations and moving folk music to bridge the gap. She wrote lots of her early songs when she was serving as a song leader for various Jewish youth camps around the country. Her prayer for healing is used in hundreds, if not thousands, of congregations around the world. And many of her songs have become so well known that they're considered, we talk about how they're Sinai, right? They've come right from Sinai. They're traditional. She, even in the Orthodox world, it always boggles my mind when I go to in an Orthodox community and they singing for Havdalah, and I don't know if they realize that was written by a woman, by Debbie Friedman. Just unbelievable. She served as a cantor at the New Reformed congregation in Los Angeles, directed the music program. She directed the annual music workshop at Olin Sang Ruby Union Institute in Wisconsin throughout her career. And in 2007, she was appointed to the faculty of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion's School of Sacred Music in New York. I was honored to have the opportunity to sing with her a few times, but in fact, I have a rather large poster on my wall of her. But what I will never forget about Debbie is that I had a congregant whose daughter, 14-year-old daughter, was dying of cancer. And the family it was a deeply spiritual family, and the family told me that when she was getting her chemo, she would always hum to herself Lechilach, a song of Debbie's, Lechilach, to a land that I will show you. When this young girl came home and was in hospice, I called Debbie in New York, and I asked her if she would come visit this girl. And so we flew Debbie up, and she and I met at this girl's home, and we sang Lechilach with her and a number of other songs of Debbie's. And I'll just never forget that Debbie was known in some ways for being a perfectionist as a performer, right? Songs had to be sung a certain way, the audio had to sound a certain way, But here we are in this young girl's bedroom, sitting on the edge of her bed, and there was such a soul connection because of the music that Debbie had crafted. And I think that's true for everyone who hears her music, who davens to her music. Some of us like some songs more than others. I certainly have my favorites and some that I don't love, but I don't think anyone can deny the fact that she changed the way Jews pray. She changed the way Jews pray, and she touched our soul, collective soul and individual souls with her music in a way that is just incredibly, incredibly profound. So that school that
you're
I just
you're
want to
right.
say that school,
finish that. Yeah,
that school that she taught at HUC has been renamed in her honor after her death as the Debbie Friedman
School of Sacred Music.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'll tell you my Debbie Friedman story, which was that in 1995, August 14th, 1995. Why do I know this day so well? Is because it was my first anniversary. Okay? And I was not with my wife on my first anniversary. That is something that's a bone of contention. Not one of my finer moments as a husband, but I was at the first Jewish healing conference. Okay?
Wow.
And I had done some work in Jewish healing in Los Angeles with one of my professors, and the Jewish Healing Conference, just outside of New York City, somewhere in the Poconos, and she was there, and she led a healing service with all of us. So yes, my first anniversary, I was with Debbie Friedman, and not Deborah Litwak. But yeah, undeniable that she changed Judaism, how we worship, how we.
We really are blessed to have so many women. I mean, we barely scratch the surface to have so many women who have impacted, influenced, and changed Judaism. And if I may, I want to just give a shout.
Next time we should do just women rabbis, because
that would be
interesting. Look. I didn't choose
only Regina at the first one.
Regina, it's just as a mention.
Right.
The women who have served as our colleagues, who have done unbelievable work.
Right. So. And I also think it's worth saying that, and I think I mentioned at the top that all of the women who aren't mentioned, all the women who sit on our synagogue boards, all the women who join committees, all the women who come to daven on Saturday mornings or Friday nights, all the women who do everything in our community and in all Jewish communities, they also change Judaism and create Judaism every day. I just don't know where we'd be without. So it's a shame that you had to listen to two testosterone-filled guys tell you about this, but the women of Judaism and the women who made Judaism are worth celebrating.
And I think it's important that men acknowledge that. So are not including women in the panel of people speaking shouldn't be seen as anything other than, well, this is our podcast and we're acknowledging what we're doing.
And we get to do whatever we want.
Darn right. Well, thank you, Rabbi David.
Thank you.
And all our listeners and watchers.
Bye, everyone.